Kia ora, I'm Sherry Grant, a Taiwan-born New Zealand pianist, cellist, poet, and festival organizer. Today is Saturday, the 11th of April 2026, and for the second episode of the Viva Viola interview series, I have invited Australian violist Robert Harris. As past president and current advisor to the Australian New Zealand Viola Society, Robert Harris has attended and performed in several international Viola Society congresses in Europe and the United States. Robert and his double bassist wife, Dorrit Herskovitz, shared careers as professional musicians in Australia as principal players in orchestras for stars such as Luciano Pavarotti, Barbara Streisand, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Stevie Wonder, also for Australian Ballet, Australian Opera, and National Touring Music Theatre productions for Australia's Oz Opera Outback Tours, and in concert cruises of the South Pacific. Rob and Dorrit's semi-retirement allows for their occasional concerts at the Sydney Opera House, music projects in regional centers including Robert's Cafe Viola gatherings and his art music history presentations for arts centers, galleries, schools, historical societies, and other communities groups. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for this opportunity. And also my congratulations, because you forgot to mention that you were also a budding viola player.
That's my secret. And a French horn player, but I was actually originally trained as a cellist and then pianist, sort of on the side, and because I like it.
I compliment your multi-skills. My wife, Dorrit, is also a French horn player and pianist, but double bass is her professional instrument.
I see. So can you share with us the start of your music journey? Why did you choose the viola?
Aha, this is one of my trick answers, because I didn't choose the viola. Initially, I chose the violin, and indeed, I only began to play viola in my early 20s when I was studying in the United States, in Pittsburgh, with a very fine European Australian violist, Richard Goldner, and his assistant teacher and wife at the time, Charmian Gadd. Richard now departed, passed away, but Charmian still retired now and living back in Australia. So my first forays into the viola were the Kegelstadt Trio, the Mozart G minor string quintet, and with Charmian, the Bach Brandenburg Six, both back in Pittsburgh and then on returning to Sydney in 1972. So originally a violinist, and even though you've mentioned these wonderful Pavarotti, Streisand, Stevie Wonder, they're the highlights of the biography which you chose, but you somehow overlooked that for 30 or 40 years before that, my focus was very much classical. And indeed, my greatest interests have been classical chamber ensembles, string trio, piano quartet, string quartet, chamber orchestra, symphony orchestra. So we've played almost everything.
That sounds exciting. So you and your wife have been principal players in so many Australian orchestras. There must be like music making at home all the time and lots of traveling. Could you share some stories? And is there much dual repertoire for the viola and the double bass? And do you have a favorite composer?
Well, that's a few questions, and I'll start with the last. Viola double bass literature is not vast. There are some fine pieces. I think the greatest of the repertoire is of our more recent time, of the 20th and perhaps 21st century. Interestingly enough, it's not a repertoire that Dorrit and I have been drawn to especially. We've preferred larger ensembles, and indeed one of those classic, or all of the classic concert cruises that we did were groups comprising string players and pianists, with Dorrit being the bassist. So not only the Trout Quintet, but explorations of the many other fine works for that combination, violin, viola, cello, piano, and double bass.
Yeah, do you have a favorite composer?
Another trick answer. I have a very good friend, cellist Gwyn Roberts, And when he was asked that question, he was asked, "Do you have a favorite piece of music?" And he said, "Oh, yes, the one I'm playing now." So
Mm.
when you ask me, do I have a favorite composer? My, my answer should be yes, the composer I'm playing now.
Haha.
So that with instrument in hand, we can devote ourselves to the music on the stand, I suppose. Interestingly, another part of the trick answer would be that whilst I really enjoy the composers of the classical European tradition, Richard Goldner, for example, in Pittsburgh and in my earlier studies with him in Australia, schooled us in Johann Sebastian Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, and Bartok into the 20th century. So that was the focus of my studies. I do enjoy contemporary music. I've had special links with some of the Australian composers, now passed away, Peter Sculthorpe, for example. He wrote a quartet, I think his 11th quartet, Jabiru Dreaming, and it was premiered by the Kronos Quartet in North America, who commissioned the work. But I was lucky enough to play the Australian premiere with a group based in Brisbane at the time. I also have favourite composers, and perhaps a surprise to you, being a pianist, when I don't want to play music, some of my favourite composers are Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Granados, solo piano repertoire. Wonderful.
Mhm. You mentioned Australian music. I'm actually going to be doing a premiere of Australian composer friends' work at the upcoming AVS festival with the host herself. So that's really exciting.
That is great. And this link between enthusiastic professional performers and composers, not that they're mutually exclusive, there are many composers who are also fine performers, but the fact that people like yourself make these opportunities to present new repertoire and not just on their home turf, but taking it internationally. And that's one of the blessings of the International Viola Congresses.
Hmm. Hmm. So you're a past president and now the advisor of the ANZVS and have been very active since the beginning of the society in the 1990s. Could you tell us a bit more about ANZVS and your involvement? And oh, wow, as the new president of ANZVS, I feel very lucky to have your advice and guidance and all the correspondence we've been doing.
Well, perhaps I'll offer some good suggestions, but perhaps you can also learn from some of my mistakes. Um, my commitment to ANZVS has ebbed and flowed over the, 3 decades, into 4 decades now, partly because of my travels. Doris and I have moved perhaps too often. We've moved from Sydney to Victoria, back to Queensland, back to Sydney, then now to Canberra. Now we're returning to regional New South Wales. And that tends to disrupt spasms of the years. You know, certain months and years become a little busy. But ANZVS did certainly offer me wonderful opportunities to contribute some ideas. I take my hat off to Michael Widerlich. He was the founding president of ANZVS, and but for his guidance, especially in New Zealand, but also in his trips to Australia, and but for his dedication to going to almost every international viola congress through many, many years, ANZVS would not be now what it has become. Credit to Michael, also to other presidents, Anna Brooker, and also a New Zealander, Greg McGarity, originally from Australia, but now I believe still New Zealand resident. The focus for ANZVS in proportional membership has certainly been New Zealand. And I think one of the challenges always here in the large and sometimes fragmented Australia is for us to attract and to hold members.
Mhm.
I believe that one of the ways of holding members is to provide them with opportunities to get together. Additionally, there has been the website, which is to be rejuvenated, and the journals, which were happening, I think, twice a year, and again will soon be returning to members. I think all of those contacts, websites, journals, get togethers, whether they be cafe violas that you've mentioned or international congresses, I think they help to attract members. The challenge seems to be to hold the members between one event and the next. Also, in Australian circles, more so than New Zealand, a way of attracting more professional violists to give back to the music community that nurtured their own success. And something, again, my compliments to you, which you've brought almost immediately in taking up the presidency, is your commitment to finding and attracting young violists to join ANZVS. And I suppose this is a parallel to the IVC, the International Viola Society's Juventus program, an attempt to attract young violists around the world, not just to be members with us, but to communicate with one another, that next generation of talented players and teachers.
Yeah, our connection to the IVS, I think, will be strengthened because I'm now also the secretary of IVS, so I can bring ideas around. Yeah, and yeah, in reviving our own society
Yes,
and
and being New Zealander, noting you're New Zealand based, for all your travels, you're focused in Auckland, and I'm Australian based. The so called tyranny of distance, it's still many miles or kilometres and many hours of flying. But in the IT age, it is possible not just for us to communicate now from Auckland to Canberra, but for people to be in touch around the world.
Mhm.
And you can see this with video masterclasses, whether you're a participant or an observer. There are so many ways that IVS, tertiary institutions can really add to the opportunities of violists on the other side of the world.
Yes, I quite agree. And also, I think the popularity of using Zoom for such meetings, I think, would be quite helpful in holding our um, events, some of the events online and keeping all the members together. And I also
This is why I'm especially keen that you attract younger violists, because I have to confess, IT and audiovisual skills are not my strength. We need a next generation of people with these talents.
Yeah, and I need a lot of help because I've just applied for more social media accounts, and we need people to maintain that as well. So I really like your idea of Cafe Viola. And could you tell us a bit more about it? I remember the last one was in last year in October 2025, and it coincided with the Floriade in Canberra. And shortly after that, we Kiwis organized a Auckland Viola Day.
Yes, just to clarify, early last year we had a Cafe Viola, and then the gathering in October was actually a long weekend. We had 2 full days, a Friday and part of the Friday and part of the Monday. So it was a more extensive contact. Already this year, we've had a Cafe Viola in Canberra with another one scheduled in September. And the likelihood, noting that I'm moving away from Canberra, a very fine violist who lives here now, Australian, John Marr, with special expertise in the realms of early music, seems keen to provide other Cafe Violas through the year. Cafe Viola, by my suggestion, is usually a half day, a morning or an afternoon of people coming together to play viola ensemble repertoire. Most often, when I've organised the sessions, they have been multi-part works with people gaining strength in numbers. So we haven't fragmented to trios and quartets. We've kept everyone attending in one large viola group. And that can allow for a very helpful mix of younger and not so young players, of some professional players and others who are enthusiastic community amateurs. So it's a rich mix. And the fact that 2 or 3 people may be sharing the one part seems to afford strength and greater confidence and perhaps even greater skill. There's quite a large repertoire, as most of the listeners would know, quite a large repertoire for viola ensembles, especially 4 part, but also up to 5, 6, and 7, and of course, an almost endless supply of viola duos, especially.
Did you do a lot of the arrangements
Noting your
yourself?
success with your Auckland viola, I'm not an arranger, but fortunately, I'm very adept at the photocopier.
Ah.
Yes. Now, I have plans, as I think I've mentioned to you. We are planning a Sydney Viola Day. I think that's to be 19th of July. And enthusiasm from some people who've heard about it to suggest that maybe we should make it a viola weekend, at least for the
Mm.
Saturday and the Sunday. So we'll hope that that takes shape. And there's the prospect of another longer gathering in Canberra. We also have with some younger violists, Jasmine Smith,
Mhm.
joining ANZVIS. And Jasmine, I think, headed off to the Congress in Paris just in January. She's come back very enthusiastically and is with her teacher, Michelle Walsh, considering, I think, planning a viola event in Brisbane, if not this year, perhaps next year.
Oh, that
So
sounds
some things
great.
will be happening.
Yeah, I think all are inspired by your Cafe Viola and the IVC. Apart from performing, you have also taught at many tertiary music institutes in various Australian cities. What would you like to say to the young violist? What are the messages you would like to offer to them?
I think dedication, if one aspires to become a professional player in an ever more competitive professional world, you have to be dedicated and focused. You need the added advantage of having good guidance and good support from families, the good fortune, hopefully, of finding good teachers. And I use that advisedly in the plural. I think students are at their best when their many years of effort have allowed them to experience a sequence of teachers, hopefully of kindred philosophy, so that one will complement the next and the next. In my own teaching, I've often felt that after 3 or 4 years, especially with younger players, I've often felt that I can't say much more than I've said many times in 3 or 4 years. And I've been quite happy to suggest our share. Now, admittedly, Dorrit and my travels from state to state have frustrated my teaching people for long, long periods of time. I know some students and their teachers have perennial productive contact. And I can think of people like Patricia Pollitt, based still in Brisbane and for many years the professor of viola at the University of Queensland, still teaching part-time. Patricia has guided so many wonderful young players to professional paths. Another fine violist who came to Australia from Britain, Carolyn Henbest, originally in the Australian Chamber Orchestra as their principal viola, but for many years now has been the faculty viola lecturer for the Australian National Academy of Music based in Melbourne. And I know that ANAM not only nurtures Australian musicians, including violists, young musicians, but I notice from their annual lineup that there are often New Zealanders who come across to be part of the ANAM program. So Carolyn Henbest, for many years now, not only a fine teacher, but a mentor, shaping philosophies and personalities to complement their instrumental and musical skills. It's a great gift to offer all of those resources to a student.
Yes. Yeah, I remember some of these names and on the nomination list for the NZBS awards. So, yeah, compliments to their efforts and all the work they've done, and your work as well to keep NZBS going all these years as well.
Well, I ebb and flow, but I certainly intend to be flowing and contributing in coming years. Semi-retirement allows a little more time, and Dorothy and I are hoping that our next farm, just 19 acres instead of 195 acres, will allow me to have a little more time to contribute to the journal, arrange some viola weekends, etc., etc., and
Mm.
perhaps even get to some viola congresses again.
Oh yes, yes. How many can you count that you've been to IVC in the past?
Um, I think a couple in Germany, but 5 or 6 in North America. I've always had a particular affection for the United States and for Canada. My father came from Canada to Australia in the 1920s, so I have family connections in Canada. But Richard Goldner left his appointment at Sydney Conservatorium in 1966 and took up a professorship at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
And aside from my years in Pittsburgh, I had summer schools with the Hungarian Quartet at Colby College in Maine, and some years later at the Banff Academy before I went for another year in Toronto, studying with Laurent Fenevish. You notice from this lineup that almost all my teachers in my North American years were displaced Europeans.
Yeah.
And that was the experience of Australia, to some extent New Zealand, and certainly North America.
Yeah.
That the difficulties of Europe in the mid 20th century brought so many great musicians to distant shores.
Hmm.
But I've always loved the United States and Canada. I'm frustrated by what seems to be happening there in recent years,
Hmm.
and I hope that things will calm and return to better days in
Yes.
the years ahead.
Yes. Yes. That just reminded me that I'm thinking of actually promoting and celebrating Australian and New Zealand music in my next festival. So I'm thinking of holding one next year. I've been doing lots of music, arts, and poetry festivals, and I've done five so far since 2019. And I think it's time for us to celebrate our music to the world. And yeah, I think I would like to find out more about the Australian repertoire, which I'm not as familiar with.
A wonderful goal, and I'm sure there are many fine violists who will assist. Patricia Pollitt, from a somewhat younger generation than myself, has been involved for decades in creating new Australian repertoire. And of course, there is a fine next generation of young violists in Australia now who are players and also composer, creative people.
Mm.
These should be the contacts. If I send you the hints of some of these names, these will be the people who will help you in that cause.
Yeah, I just love the viola family, and I love composers, and I've invited so many to write viola music for me, even though at the time I didn't play the viola, but I love playing with the violists. What do you think makes the violists stick together and keep on going back to IVC year after year? And how do you think the viola societies look in the future, and how do we collaborate, among ourselves and also internationally?
In my contacts with IVS, going to congresses,
Mhm.
and also my contact through correspondence of committees and YouTubes, the things that have been created, I find them a very warm and welcoming family. And it's not surprising that they seek to return and meet one another again in almost, well, six continents now, if not seven. We haven't had an Antarctic viola congress, perhaps we never will. But it's certainly wonderful to see the members of the chapters, the national viola societies meeting at the international gatherings. Of course, the ANZVS, I think, is unique in that family because it is the one society that combines members of two countries.
Uh-huh.
And I think that is a good example in itself. Although I compliment the fact that there are so many new countries in the last, what, 5, 10 years, so many new chapters have joined the International Viola Society network. By the way, early on, I surprised you when I said that I chose the violin. Eventually, the viola chose me. When I came back to Australia, and before I went to my year in Canada, I discovered the opportunity to establish a string trio at a university in northern New South Wales called the University of New England. And when I went to Canada for that year, my major project was actually establishing the group, which came back to Australia in 1974. It turned out to be a string trio and piano quartet combined. And from that change of career from violin to viola, starting in 1975 especially, I can honestly say now that the viola has chosen me. And I can only imagine that so many members of ANZVS and of other international viola societies, and indeed the international congresses, they're there because they love the instrument, as
Mhm.
I do, and they love the sound, as I do, and they love the repertoire, not just classical. The fact that it's an instrument that can survive in almost every style, every genre. So I didn't start out with the viola, but I'm sure glad I'm here now.
Well, thank you for your time, Robert, and I look forward to meeting you in person in Sydney very soon. That's in 2 weeks' time after my trip to help set up a new viola society in Taiwan. Thank you.
Again, thank you for this opportunity and all the best, because I gathered that part of your going to Taiwan is to attempt to energize a viola society there.
Hmm. Well, there hasn't been a formal one yet. They've been talking about putting one together, but it takes time and a lot of people. You need quite a few members and across the whole country to actually make it possible.
Good, good. All the best with that quest.
Thank you.